The micro-brand watch space is more crowded than it used to be. New and aspiring brands have their work cut out for them to break in and survive, let alone go on to success. This is one brand in recent years that has managed just that. Welcome to Addicted to Watches. I am of course talking about Erebus, the brand started by Jody of Just One More Watch, who I had the pleasure of doing a little watch lending with for some videos. They started with a diver, but it's their more recent Garter I have here today to look at. So, the question is this worthy of the heaping praise it seems to receive, or is it just a cash grab to make up for declining YouTube ad revenue? This is the Erebus Ascent 39 in Aventurine. There are a lot of things to talk about when it comes to this one, so let's get right into it.
Can I have a minute to talk about my favourite subject? Money.
Pricing on these can be a little complicated. Well, on any watch from a micro brand these days. There is often a discounted price for early birds or pre-orders, as well as ongoing sales and codes available. Erebus is no different. Though the current price of this model is $795 Australian or $499 US, it may be had cheaper. This, along with some other stone dial options, are the most expensive variations. Prices for other configurations start from $699 Australian dollars or $449 US. However, if you ordered one of these when first announced, they were going for significantly less, starting at $349. The brand also runs regular sales for their mailing lists and on their website, so it's always worth taking a look and being a little patient. At the time of writing, there was a sale on the blue mother of pearl versions. Which leads nicely to the different versions available. There are a lot. Choice was the name of the game with this model, now coming in no less than 16 dial colours, materials or textures, not to mention some that were discontinued. If that wasn't enough, it's also available in 36mm and 41mm case sizes, with some additional dial configurations unique to each size. And a quartz version in 39 was also released and sold out. That is without including any of the newly announced GMT versions that are currently on pre-order. Oh, and did I mention you can choose between two bracelet styles? Clearly, the model family has been very successful for the brand, and they've been pretty clear about that. Looking at the website, the Ascent in some form or another takes up 60% of the product categories. I will say that there is probably a real risk of Ascent fatigue. When announcing the GMT version, Jody also alluded to this, saying they'll be releasing different model families in the coming months. Okay, I know what you're saying. Get to the watch already. Fair enough, I've waffled on for long enough. Out of all those options available, the one I ended up with was the Aventurine. It wouldn't have been my first choice. In fact, it was one of my last ones. But it came up for sale second hand for a cheap price, so I grabbed it to check out the watch and the brand. What we have is a very clean, legible watch that is chasing the go anywhere do anything form. I've long been a fan of simple three-handers, which you'll see pretty clearly from the types of watches I've looked at on the channel, and this was one I was interested in. The dial is definitely not as low-key as I usually aim for, but I can't deny it does catch the light. That's both the particles in the dial and the glossy surface of the dial itself. It is more of a dark blue or purple colour than black under bright light, but in most situations is close enough to black. For my taste, it's a little too sparkly, but for Aventurine fans, I think this would be a hit. Sitting atop that is a set of applied hour markers that seem to be taking a fair amount of inspiration from watches like the Aquaterra. They're quite tall markers, and the high polished bevels running along the edge play with the light nicely as well as create a bit of a sense of depth. At 12, there is a double set of markers for orientation, while at 6 the marker has been cut short to make way for a date window. The trend in recent times has been to put the date window at 6 to maintain dial symmetry. This one has an applied frame, and the wheel beneath has been colour matched to the dial, something common across all colour dial variations. There is one last piece of applied material on the dial. That is of course the logo above the pinion. Okay, technically two pieces, not one since the logo is made up of two shapes. This has been polished and the brand name in their font is printed in white underneath. I would have liked to see the applied logo finished in brushing rather than polishing, as it tends to disappear against the dark dial a lot of the time. Moving below the pinion, and there is the model name Ascent in a cursive script which reminds me a lot of the Seiko Saab models, as well as 10 ATM water resistance rating. Then we come to the hands, another important part of the legibility equation. The brand has not been shy about telling us that these hands are much more expensive components than ordinary hands thanks to the design and finishing. They are a nice handset, so it was money well spent. The hands are well balanced and taper nicely as they reach the end before being squared off. All of the sides have received polished bevels and of course been filled with lume. The second hand is a needle hand with a lumed counterbalance as well. Speaking of lume, let's turn off the lights and take a look at this watch after dark. One complaint Jody has of many watches that land on his desk relate to lume, and the lume on this watch is understandably good. They glow an ice blue colour thanks to the BGW9 lume used. It's bright initially and lasts pretty well. It's not quite on the level of a good diver, but it's better than a lot of average divers. It's one of the few watches that'll even get a bit of day lume from after going indoors from a bright sunny day. Moving on, and we come to the crystal covering all of that. It is of course sapphire. It wouldn't be a micro brand packing in all the specs without sapphire. This one is good, but not perfect. Though to be honest, there might not be a perfect one. It's very subtly domed, which I really like as I think it adds refinement and a bit of elegance to the watch. It's also received some anti-reflective coating to cut down on reflections. The problem is that any domed crystal like this will get reflections just because of the nature of the domed shape. It happens on my Grand Seiko watches, and it happens on AliExpress cheapies. The solution is to have a flat crystal, but then you lose the refinement of the domed shape. Given the choice, I think I would pick slightly domed too, so it's not a complaint from me, but something to be aware of. Zooming out a little, and let's take a look at the dimensions of the watch. We already know one of them, the 39mm case diameter. Thanks to the movement utilized in this watch, the height is kept to just 10.8mm. Lug to lug on the case measures 44.8mm. However, if you have the O bracelet, then the male end links do extend that slightly to 51.4mm. Thankfully, the distance between the lugs is 20mm, so changing out alternate straps won't be an issue. Overall, we've got a pretty compact set of dimensions, which means the watch is going to wear well, and I'd say it even wears a bit smaller than those dimensions on wrist. Why do I say that? Let's take a look at the design of the case and I'll explain why. Up front we have a slim polished bezel, standard for pretty much any everyday watch like this. That sits atop some vertically brushed lugs, which cut in quite far and have very small shoulders by the time they reach the lug ends. When we turn it around to the side, however, we can see two big polished surfaces that make up the mid-case. These are bisected by a very thin, almost imperceptible line of brushing. These are what make the watch wear smaller than the 39mm case size. First of all, they extend out past the edge of the bezel. The dial and bezel play a big part in how a watch feels, so by shrinking them in from the edge of the case itself, the watch feels smaller. Those sides being polished also help, because that surface will often be reflecting your wrist or the back of your hand, which makes it disappear into the background. Because of this, I'd say the watch feels more like a 37mm size on wrist a lot of the time. It's actually a case design very similar to another watch I have, the Grand Seiko SBGR 311. Looking at them side by side like this, you can see just how similar they are in terms of the curves, lines, and the way the polished surfaces are used. In the same way, this Grand Seiko wears smaller than its 42mm case size as well. Many brands take inspiration from big Swiss designs, but not too many look to Grand Seiko for inspiration. I won't call it original, but it is a nice design that the Ascent has here for its case. You might also say that for some of their Helix dials, Erebus looked to this and other Grand Seiko models for inspiration too. Looking at the side, and we're presented with a screw-down crown that has been signed with the Erebus logo. It's a good size and turns nice and smoothly. The logo has been engraved here, but part of me thinks it should have been lume filled, especially with how passionate Jody is about lume. Turning all the way over, and there's a similarly engraved caseback with the same logo. Technically, I think the brand said this is oil pressed rather than engraved, and though I'm not particularly fussed about casebacks, this one is nice and slim, which is the most important thing here. Hiding beneath this is the Miyota 9015 movement. It hacks, hand winds, and beats at 4 Hz or 8 times per second. It's thinner than your average 4R35 from Seiko, and generally considered to be a tier higher as well. The only thing to note about the movement is that the rotor only winds in one direction, so can spin a lot if you shake the watch. Then we come to the bracelet. This is what the brand calls the O style, as opposed to the J style that's also available. It has solid end links with quick release tabs, and that end link is a male one as I mentioned before, which does extend the lug to lug a bit. Like the case, it's brushed on top and polished on the sides. It tapers from 20mm at the case to 16mm before it gets to a pretty chunky clasp. It's probably a clasp you've seen before on other micro brands and even San Martin watches. It's fully milled, brushed on top with polished bevels and polished on the side. The clasp party trick is the on-the-fly adjustment hiding within. If you push this button here, the bracelet extends a few clicks and it can then be pushed in to dial in your perfect fit. This watch came second-hand to me and, as you can clearly see, it's seen its fair share of wear. With all that out of the way, let's get it on wrist and see how it wears. This is part of the reason this model has been such a hit for the brand. It just wears so well. The case is nicely sized, nicely balanced, and nicely finished. It sits flush against the wrist and is unobtrusive but not diminutive. It's got presence without being overbearing. As I turn my wrist, all the polished accents catch the light in addition to the dial, of course, and overall the wearing experience is good. This watch actually came to me with 2 out of 3 additional straps from the pack available from Erebus. So, here it is on the first, the black nylon strap. I could take it or leave it. And also on the FKM rubber strap. This one is very soft and comfortable, though the sporty look might suit some of the other dial colours better. Switching it out for one of my own straps, this brown leather on the watch looks a little more at home. Because those male end links are gone, it also feels more comfortable and snug to the wrist. An aventurine dial won't be the most versatile when it comes to strap options, but I do like how it looks on this one. It's not hard to see why this watch was so popular, and it's one I've had my eye on since release. When I saw it for a reasonable price, I jumped on it even though it wasn't my preferred dial option. That's not to say, however, that the watch is perfect. I do have some complaints. I mentioned briefly the crystal, and even though I said I wouldn't complain about it, I'm gonna complain about it. It does pick up reflections and fingerprints a little too easily. Then there is the hands, one in particular. The brand said these are very expensive components, and so I would have liked to see all the details done right, not just most of them. The counterbalance on the second's hand strikes me as a bit odd. It's a curved teardrop shape. Considering all the other hands and hour markers are a lot more angular and straight, surely a triangular or at least squared off counterbalance here would have suited the design better. My other complaints relate to the bracelet. First is the clasp. It's too big and chunky for a watch like this. Jody emphasizes the swooping curves and lines of the case, and I agree it's very sleek. But then it's completely juxtaposed against a big, cumbersome clasp. It's almost as thick as the case itself. At its thickest, I measure it at 7.3mm, which is not that far behind the 10.8mm case. There's another similar gap between the bracelet and the end of the clasp that the Seiko Saab's got a lot of hate for. So, I think this watch too is not immune to that criticism. I would have been happier with a manually adjustable clasp that was thinner. Considering the brand's focus on choice, with choices available between dials, sizes, movements, straps, and more, they could have offered an alternate clasp. This unfortunately isn't the type you can swap out easily either, because of how it integrates into the bracelet. And finally there's the end links. I've removed the bracelet a couple of times to get it out and try it on other straps. And one thing I've found is that the tolerances for the end link fitting in between the lugs are extremely tight, even up to the point where it can hold the weight of the watch without spring bars being seated into the lugs. It's something I've generally only really come across with AliExpress type watches, and just makes the watch feel less refined. Here you can see the spring bar is outside of the lugs, but the watch is still being held in because of how tight it is. Even moving it like this, it's still held in. One final thing I'll mention here, while we're on the end links, is that on one side, the quick release spring bars don't completely fit into the lugs. Looking at where the tabs are, you can see that one side has not moved at all, and the spring inside is still compressed. It has not gone into the lug hole at all. I'm not worried about the bracelet coming off, just because the other side of the spring bar is in, and because of the aforementioned tight tolerances, but it should fit into the lugs. While each complaint on their own is fairly minor, they have all added up and taken a little bit of the shine off the watch for me. I do wonder if part of it is also because I'm not a fan of this aventurine, and if it was the white dial, I'd be more forgiving. That was more complaints than I originally expected to have about this watch. When it was first announced, I was quite interested, and even contemplated pre-ordering it as well. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it now that I have one. I'm conflicted because there are some aspects I really like, such as the way the case wears, the simple straightforward design, and the value for money on offer. But there are other aspects that turn me off. Granted, changing out the bracelet for a strap does solve a lot of them, but I tend to stick with bracelets, and if I buy a watch on one, I'm expecting to wear it on that bracelet. I can see why this watch was initially so popular for the brand, but at the same time, after so many different versions and combinations, it might be time for Erebus to move on to something else. Ultimately, this Ascent 39 set itself a target of being the ultimate everyday watch, and, judging by the reception from watch enthusiasts, it seems like it hit the mark. It's by no means the perfect watch, and has its share of flaws, but I think it represents an earnest endeavour to create something in the pursuit of passion rather than profit. What do you think about this watch? Have you got one of these in your collection, or multiple? Does yours not have the same issue with the end links? Is Jody just cashing in on his channel with this brand? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.